Widow accepted a house with a hole as payment, but froze upon discovering the reason. Sarah Mitchell pressed her 6-month-old grandson to her chest as she listened to the proposal that would change her life forever. The merchant Raymond Clark stood there at the door of her small rented house in Bakersfield, California, offering something that seemed impossible: a house of her own to settle the debt left by her late husband, Thomas. "The house has one problem, Mrs. Sarah," said Raymond, adjusting his leather hat under the scorching desert sun. "There's a hole in the middle of the main room, but that's it. The rest is in perfect condition." Sarah swayed gently, trying to calm little Daniel, who was whimpering in the heat. Her mind raced. It had been 3 months since Thomas had left to work on the sugar plantations in the interior of Arizona and never returned. The letters stopped coming, the money ran out, and now the rent was 2 months overdue. "What kind of hole?" she asked, suspicious. "It's old, Mum. Must have been a well or something like that. But it's been dry for years. Covering it with some planks solves the problem." The merchant seemed anxious, sweating more than the heat warranted. Sarah noticed how he averted his eyes when talking about the hole, and his hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with the papers he carried. "If the house is good, why don't you sell it to someone else? Why accept it as payment for a debt?" Raymond swallowed hard and forced a smile. "Because I need to settle this matter quickly, Ma'am. Thomas was a man of his word, and I want to honor his memory. Besides, the house is somewhat isolated. It's not easy to find a buyer." Sarah looked around her small rented house. It was just one room where she slept on the floor with her grandson, with no furniture besides an old pot and 2 bowls. The landlady had already threatened to evict her the previous week. She had no choice. "Can I see the house first?" Of course, we can go right now if you'd like." The walk to the property took about 20 minutes. Sarah carried Daniel in her arms, protecting him from the sun with a piece of yellowed cloth that served as a blanket. The land was arid, with only a few saguaro cacti scattered about, and the occasional mesquite tree offering scarce shade. The house appeared on the horizon as a low, sturdy structure made of adobe and clay, with thick walls that promised coolness in the day's heat. The clay roof was intact, and there was a small fenced yard in the back. "See? Well maintained," said Raymond, with forced enthusiasm in his voice. Sarah examined the exterior walls. They really did seem solid. There was a small window on the side and a wooden door in the front that, although old, was firmly in place. "The key," she requested. Raymond hesitated for a second before handing over a rusty iron key. When Sarah opened the door, the first thing she noticed was the smell. It wasn't bad, but strange. Sweet and sour at the same time, like ripe fruit mixed with damp earth. The light coming through the door and the small window illuminated the interior. The house had 2 rooms, a smaller one that would serve as a bedroom, and a larger one that would be the main room. And right in the center of the main room was the hole. Sarah approached slowly. The opening was about 1 meter in diameter and was covered with some old, loose planks. When she carefully moved them aside, she could see that the hole went down quite a bit, disappearing into darkness. "How deep is it?" she asked. "I'm not sure. Maybe 3-4 meters. Like I said, it was dry when I acquired the property." Raymond was visibly nervous, pacing back and forth and looking more at the hole than at her. Daniel began to cry more loudly. Sarah noticed that the baby's crying echoed strangely in the hole, as if there were a larger space beneath than was visible. "Can I throw a stone to hear the sound?" "No," Raymond answered too quickly, then tried to correct himself. "I mean, it could cause structural problems. It's better not to disturb it too much until you settle in." Sarah found the reaction odd, but she was too tired to question it. Daniel needed a roof over his head, and she needed a place where she could try to start a new life. "All right, I accept." The relief on Raymond's face was immense. "Great. I'll fetch the papers in town and come back later today to settle everything." As Raymond hurried away, Sarah was alone in the house for the first time. She put Daniel on the floor of the smallest room, where he could crawl safely, and went back to examine the hole more closely. There was something on the edges she hadn't noticed before. Small marks, as if someone had scratched the stone with a sharp tool. The marks formed little symbols she couldn't decipher, but which were clearly not natural. When she leaned in to look closer, she heard a faint sound coming from inside the hole. like a whisper of wind, but with no breeze in the air. Daniel stopped crying abruptly. Sarah rushed back to the room and found the baby staring intently toward the main room, as if paying attention to something only he could perceive. "What is it, my love?" she murmured, picking him up. When they returned to the main room, the sound had stopped. Raymond returned in the late afternoon with the documents. Sarah signed the papers without being able to read them well, as she had never properly learned to read. He quickly explained where his signature was and where hers should be, and within minutes everything was settled. "One last thing, Mrs. Sarah. It's important that you don't disturb the hole for now. It could cause cracks in the walls. When I have some extra money, I'll come here and help seal it properly." "All right. And if anyone comes here asking about the house or the hole, it's best not to say too much. Some people like to make up stories about old houses." Sarah nodded, but the warning made her even more curious. That night, she slept on the floor of the smallest room with Daniel beside her. She had brought her few belongings in 2 cloth bags, some clothes, a pot, the bowls, and a thin blanket. Around midnight, she woke to Daniel crying. When she got up to soothe him, she heard the sound from the hole again. This time it was different. It sounded like metal hitting metal, very faint, but clearly audible in the night's silence. She stood still, listening. The sound repeated every few seconds, as if someone were lightly tapping on something down there. Daniel calmed down as soon as she picked him up and moved away from the wall, separating the 2 rooms. The next day, Sarah decided to explore the house's surroundings better. The backyard had a few prickly pear plants and a small tool shed. When she opened the shed door, she found some old tools: a hoe, a rusty hammer, a thick rope, and, to her surprise, an oil lantern that still worked. It was then she noticed recent footprints in the dirt around the shed. Boot prints, clearly not Raymond's, who wore leather sandals. "Good morning." Sarah turned, startled. A middle-aged woman was approaching from the vacant lot. She wore a simple calico dress and carried a bundle in her hands. "I'm Helen. I live over there in the yellow house." The woman pointed to a small building about 200 meters away. "I came to welcome you. Thank you very much. I'm Sarah. I saw you moved in yesterday. Raymond finally got someone to stay in the house." There was something in Helen's tone that sounded strange to Sarah. "Finally?" "Well, it's been about 2 years that he's been trying to sell or rent this property, but the folks around here are afraid." "Afraid of what?" Helen looked around, as if wanting to make sure they were alone. "Because of the hole. They say old George, who lived here before, vanished from one moment to the next. He left everything behind and no one ever heard from him again." Sarah felt a shiver but tried not to show it. "People disappear for all sorts of reasons. Maybe he went to the big city. Could be. But there are other strange things. Every now and then at night people see a faint light coming from that direction, and there are some sounds too." "What kind of sounds?" "Like someone was messing with metal, banging, dragging, but always in the dead of night." Sarah decided to change the subject. "Did you bring anything for me?" "Yes." Helen lifted the bundle. "Some fruit and a little flour. I figured you hadn't had time to stock up yet." The 2 women entered the house. Helen greeted Daniel, who was on the floor playing with a wooden spoon. "What a beautiful boy. Is he your son?" "Grandson. My son and daughter-in-law left soon after he was born. We don't know where they are. Just like my husband and George, everyone vanishing." As they talked, Sarah noticed Helen glancing discreetly at the hole. When they got near the opening, the neighbor stopped talking and stared intently. "George messed with this hole a lot," she finally said, "always going down and up. He said he was looking for water, but he never brought up a single drop." "He went down in there?" "Yes, he did. He had a rope ladder. He'd spend hours down there." That explained the rope Sarah had found in the shed. After Helen left, Sarah kept thinking about the conversation. If George went down into the hole regularly, it was because there was something important down there. And if Raymond knew about it, why hadn't he mentioned it? She decided to try to find out on her own. Waiting for nightfall, she lit the oil lantern and tied one end of the rope to one of the roof beams. She threw the other end into the hole. Daniel was sleeping soundly in the bedroom. Sarah began to descend slowly, testing each foothold before putting her full weight on it. The walls of the hole were natural stone, but there were clear marks that someone had worked there, creating small steps and handholds. 3 meters down, her lantern illuminated something that made her stop immediately. It wasn't the bottom of a well. It was a metal lid, a round lid, the exact size of the hole's opening, made of iron with a lock right in the center. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Sarah descended the last few centimeters and stepped onto the lid. The metallic sound echoed hollowly, confirming there was an empty space underneath. She examined the lock carefully. It was rusty, but seemed functional. Next to the lock, engraved in the metal, was a symbol she recognized. It was the same one she had seen on the edges of the hole up top. When she tried to move the lid, she realized it was far too heavy for one person, but there were fresh scratches on the metal around the lock, as if someone had tried to force it open recently. Suddenly, she heard footsteps up above. "Mrs. Sarah, Sarah!" It was Raymond's voice. She quickly extinguished the lantern and stayed completely silent, breathing slowly. "I know you're there, Mrs. Sarah. I saw the light." Raymond's footsteps circled the house a few times. Sarah heard him open the front door and enter. "Sarah?" His voice was closer now. He was in the main room, right above her. "What's this business about messing with the hole? Didn't I tell you it was dangerous?" Sarah remained silent. After a few minutes, Raymond left the house and walked away, but she waited another half-hour before going up. When she returned to the surface, she found Daniel still sleeping peacefully. But there was something different about the house. Some of her things had been moved. The pot was in a different position, and the blanket was folded differently. Raymond had searched her belongings. The next day, she decided to look for Helen to ask some questions. "Helen, did you know George well?" "Yes, I did. He was a reserved man, but hard-working. He lived alone after his wife passed away." "Did he have a specific profession?" "He was a blacksmith. He had a small workshop there where the shed is at the back of your house." That made sense. A blacksmith would have the tools and knowledge needed to work with metal and create a lock like the one Sarah had seen. "Helen, can I ask you a strange question?" "Of course." "Have you ever seen an old key around here? A large iron key?" Helen thought for a moment. "Funny you should ask that. George always carried a key hanging from his neck. He was a bit superstitious about it. Said it protected something important." "Did he disappear with the key?" "I don't know about that. But I remember when Raymond came to sell the house, he asked several times if George had left anything behind. Keys, tools, things like that." Sarah began to understand. Raymond didn't just want the house. He wanted what was buried beneath it, and the key was the missing piece. That afternoon she decided to search the back shed more thoroughly. If George was a blacksmith and worked there, perhaps he had hidden the key somewhere safe. She examined every tool, every shelf, every corner of the small shed. At the back, behind some rusty sheets of metal, she found a small wooden box. Inside the box were some old coins, a yellowed photograph of a man and a woman, and wrapped in a piece of cloth, a large, heavy iron key, the same key that would fit the lock on the lid. Sarah looked at the photograph. The man's face was marked by work and age, but his eyes were kind. The woman beside him was smiling, wearing a simple party dress. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "George and Margaret, our wedding, 1943. If the photo was from the wedding, George was already an older man when he disappeared, and if he had a wife, what had happened to her? Sarah decided to keep the key in a safe place and wait for the right opportunity to use it. But first, she wanted to better understand what was happening. The following night, she pretended to sleep, but stayed alert to any sound. Around 2 in the morning, she heard light footsteps approaching the house. Through the crack in the window, she saw the silhouette of Raymond walking cautiously around the property. He carried a flashlight and something that looked like a tool. Raymond stopped at the door of the house and, to Sarah's surprise, took a key from his pocket and opened the door silently. She heard him enter the main room and head to the hole. There were metallic noises, as if he were trying to force something. After about an hour, Raymond left the house and disappeared into the darkness. The next day, Sarah examined the hole and noticed fresh marks on the edge. Raymond had tried to go down, but apparently couldn't get past the metal lid. It was time to make a decision. That night, after making sure Daniel was sound asleep, she took the flashlight, the rope, and the key, and went down into the hole again. This time, when she reached the lid, she inserted the key into the lock. It turned with difficulty, but it worked. She heard the click of the mechanism opening. The lid was indeed very heavy, but with effort she managed to move it enough to create an opening. Below was a stone staircase descending to an underground compartment. Sarah took a deep breath and began to descend. The underground compartment was surprisingly large. Its walls were made of well-laid brick, and the ceiling was arched, showing it had been built with knowledge and care. As she swept the flashlight beam around the room, she almost dropped the lantern in shock. The compartment was full of ceramic pots, wooden boxes, and cloth sacks, all carefully organized and labeled. Sarah approached one of the pots and read the label. Santos Family, 1962. Another read, Williams Family, 1958. A third, Mitchell Family, 1965. She carefully opened one of the smaller pots. Inside were simple but well-preserved jewels, a gold ring, a chain with a small crucifix, and some silver earrings. In one of the wooden boxes she found documents, property deeds, birth certificates, marriage certificates, all organized by family and by year. Sarah was inside a community vault. For decades, the families of the region had used that secret place to store their most precious possessions during times of hardship, and George was the guardian. On an improvised table at the back of the compartment, she found a notebook. It was George's record of every deposit and withdrawal. The last entries were dated just 2 years prior. The handwriting was careful, from someone who had little schooling but valued education. March 1967, Davis family brought land documents. Difficult situation with the drought, stored in Vault 15. April 1967, Clark family withdrew grandmother's jewels. Situation improved with the rains, returned as stored in 1963. May 1967, Raymond Clark came asking about the system. I don't trust him. Refused information. Sarah stopped reading. Raymond had known about the vault's existence for years. She continued reading. June 1967, Raymond returned with a proposal to modernize the system. Wants to charge families a fee. Refused again. July 1967, Raymond threatened to reveal the vault's location if I didn't accept a partnership. Need to find a solution. August 1967, Margaret suggested we seek out relatives in Phoenix until the situation calms down. Raymond could be dangerous. The last entry was from September 1967. Leaving tomorrow with Margaret for her brother's house in Phoenix, leaving key in a safe place. If anything happens to me, the new guardian must protect the family's assets. Raymond cannot have access. So George hadn't disappeared mysteriously. He had fled with his wife out of fear of Raymond, and he had hidden the key before leaving. Sarah now understood why Raymond was so desperate. He knew the vault existed, knew it contained valuables from dozens of families, but couldn't access it without the key. And now she was the only person who had access. But she also understood she was in danger. If Raymond discovered she had found the key, he wouldn't hesitate to use force to get what he wanted. She quickly examined some of the other containers. There were documents from more than 30 different families, some dating back to the 1940s. Jewelry, money, land deeds, important certificates, all the possessions that simple desert folk considered too valuable to keep at home during times of drought, floods, or instability. It was an informal but efficient system of mutual protection, and George had been the honest guardian all these families trusted. Before going back up, Sarah copied some names from the labels onto a piece of paper she found on George's table. She needed to contact these families and warn them about the situation. Back on the surface, she carefully closed the lid and climbed the rope. Daniel was still sleeping peacefully, but as she was putting away the flashlight, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching again. Sarah ran to the bedroom and pretended to be asleep, but kept her ears alert. This time, Raymond wasn't alone. There were at least 2 male voices talking in whispers outside the house. "Are you sure she went down there?" "Yes. I saw the light yesterday and today too." She found something. What if she found the key? Then we have a bigger problem than we thought. The footsteps circled the house several times. Sarah heard when they forced the back door and entered the shed. They've gone through everything here. George's box is gone. That confirms it. She has the key. What do we do now? Tomorrow I'll come back here with a proposal she won't be able to refuse. If that doesn't work, we'll have to resort to more persuasive methods. The men left, but Sarah stayed awake the rest of the night planning what to do. The next morning, she decided to look for the first family on the list she had copied. She put Daniel in an improvised sling and walked to the Santos house, which was about 2 kilometers away. Mrs. Teresa Johnson was a 60-year-old woman who received her with initial distrust, but who completely changed her attitude when Sarah mentioned the name of George and the safe. "My God, girl, we haven't heard anything from George in 2 years. My husband was worried about some deeds we left stored with him. Mrs. Teresa, I found the safe. Your deeds are there." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Bless God. I thought we had lost everything. Without those deeds, we can't prove the land is ours." "But there's a problem. There's a man who wants to take the safe for himself. I need help to protect all the family's assets." Mrs. Teresa called her husband, Mr. Anthony, and the two listened to the whole story. When Sarah finished explaining the situation, Mr. Anthony slammed his fist on the table. "That Raymond has always been greedy. He's already tried to take land from several families here in the region with invented debts and fake contracts." "We will help you, girl," said Mrs. Teresa, "but you need to contact the other families too. Together, we are stronger than Raymond and his henchmen." Sarah spent the rest of the day visiting the families whose names were on her list. The reaction was always the same: gratitude and relief to know their assets were safe, followed by concern about Raymond's intentions. Mrs. Dorothy Williams almost fainted when she learned that the family jewels she had stored with George in 1958 were still protected. "They were from my mother and my grandmother. I thought I had lost everything when George disappeared." Mr. John Davis, a 70-year-old man, was moved when he learned that his property documents were safe. "Girl, those papers are the only proof that my family has a right to our land. Without them, my children are left with nothing." By the end of the day, Sarah had contacted 7 families. They all agreed to meet the following night to discuss how to protect the safe from Raymond. But when she arrived home, she found Raymond waiting at the door, accompanied by 2 men she didn't know. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Sarah. We need to talk." His tone of voice was different, harder, less cordial. "About what?" "About what you've been messing with in my house." "Your house? The papers you gave me say the house is mine." "The papers say the house is yours, but they don't say anything about what's underneath it, and what's underneath is rightfully mine." Sarah pretended not to understand. "I don't know what you're talking about." Raymond made a sign to the 2 men, who positioned themselves on either side of the door. "Mrs. Sarah, let's not waste time pretending. I know you found the safe, I know you have the key, and I know you spent the day visiting the families who had things stored there." Sarah's heart raced, but she tried to stay calm. "I don't know of any safe." "Let me explain something, ma'am. I have a right to that safe because I'm the one who loaned money to most of these families over the years. They owe me more than they have stored down there. If they owe you, settle it with them. The house is mine. The house is yours, but the land beneath it is another story." "I can prove in court that I have a right to that safe." Raymond approached, and Sarah instinctively stepped back, protecting Daniel. "I'll make a final offer. You give me the key, I take what belongs to me, and I'll even pay you $1,000 to move from here to a better place." "And if I refuse? Then we'll have problems. I can prove you're trespassing on private property. I can prove you're seizing assets that aren't yours. You could end up in jail, ma'am, and the boy will end up in an orphanage." The threat against Daniel made Sarah feel a rage she had never experienced before. "Get off my property, now." "Fine, but tomorrow I'll return with the papers that prove my rights, and then there will be no discussion." The 3 men walked away, but Sarah noticed that one of them stayed hidden behind a distant tree, watching the house. That night, even though afraid, she went down to the safe again. This time she brought paper and a pencil and copied all the names and all the information she could. If Raymond tried to take the safe, she would need proof to show who those assets really belonged to. She also made an important discovery. At the bottom of the compartment, George had left a sealed letter with the inscription, "For the next guardian." Sarah opened the letter carefully. "If you are reading this letter, it is because something has happened to me and you have become responsible for this safe. First, know that this responsibility is an honor. For 25 years, I have protected the assets of honest, hard-working families who trust me. Second, be careful with Raymond Clark. He is not the honest merchant he pretends to be. For years, he has loaned money to desperate families at exorbitant interest rates, then used the debts to take their land. Many of the families who have assets stored here lost their properties to him, but managed to save at least their documents and most precious jewels. Third, there is an honest lawyer in the city of Fresno named Dr. Michael Thompson. He knows about this system and can help legally if needed. I left with him a copy of all the records and an authorization for him to act on behalf of the depositor families. Fourth, if Raymond gets the safe, dozens of families will lose not only their assets, but also the only protection they have against his greed. Do not let that happen. May God bless you and give you wisdom. George Harrison. Sarah folded the letter and put it away carefully. Now she knew exactly what to do. The next morning she left Daniel with Mrs. Teresa Johnson and took the first bus to Fresno. The trip took 2 hours, and she spent the whole time thinking about what she would say to the lawyer. Dr. Michael Thompson's office was on a small street in the center of town. It was a simple but well-kept building. When Sarah explained who she was and why she was there, the lawyer immediately rose from his chair. "Have you found George?" "No, doctor, but I found the letter he left. And the safe." Dr. Michael, a man of about 50 with graying hair and reading glasses, listened to the whole story without interrupting. When she finished, he went to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. Exactly as George said, here are copies of all the safe's records up to 1967, and here is the authorization he gave me to represent the families if necessary. What can we do to stop Raymond? First, we'll formalize the situation. This community protection system is not illegal, but it also has no formal legal protection. We can create a proper cooperative that will give official rights to the safeguarding families and the guardian. What about Raymond? I have documentation here of at least 12 cases where he used questionable practices to seize properties. If he tries to use force or threats, we can sue him for extortion. Dr. Michael quickly prepared all the necessary documents to create the Bakersfield Family Asset Protection Cooperative. Sarah was appointed the official guardian, and each safeguarding family would become a member of the cooperative. Take these documents and gather all the families to sign, then come back here and we'll register everything officially. Sarah returned home late in the afternoon. Raymond was there waiting with the same 2 men and some papers in hand. "The time has come, Mrs. Sarah. Here are the documents that prove my right to the vault." Sarah looked at the papers. They were fake loan contracts with signatures that had clearly been forged. "These documents are fake. Prove it." "I can prove it." Sarah showed the documents she had brought from Fresno. "This is the official documentation of the Bakersfield Family Asset Protection Cooperative. I am the legal guardian, appointed by all the families who own the assets safeguarded in the vault." Raymond's expression quickly changed from confidence to anger. "This is worthless. They're made-up papers." "They are papers registered with a notary public, with the signature of Dr. Michael Thompson, a licensed attorney. If you want to contest it, you can take it to court." Raymond looked at the 2 men, then back at Sarah. "You don't know who you're messing with, lady. I'll ruin you and your made-up cooperative. If you threaten me one more time, I'll go to the police station. I have witnesses to everything you've said and done." At that moment, Mr. Anthony Johnson appeared on the road, accompanied by 4 other men whom Sarah recognized as husbands from the families she had visited. "Is there a problem here, Mrs. Sarah?" asked Mr. Anthony. "Raymond was just leaving," she replied, without taking her eyes off the merchant. Raymond looked around, realizing he was outnumbered. He signaled to the 2 men, and the 3 of them walked away without another word. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. "We brought the signatures," said Mr. Anthony, handing a sheet to Sarah. "All the families agreed to the cooperative, and there are more people wanting to join." During the following week, Sarah organized the complete legalization of the cooperative. Dr. Michael came personally to Bakersfield to oversee the process and see the vault in person. "In 40 years of practicing law, I've never seen a community protection system so well organized," he said after examining George's records. "This should serve as a model for other regions." The cooperative grew quickly. Families who didn't even know the vault existed came forward asking to join. Some had lost important documents in floods or robberies and wanted to make sure it didn't happen again. Sarah officially became the guardian of the cooperative, with a small salary paid by the participating families. For the first time in months, she had a stable income and a home of her own. Daniel grew up healthy and happy, surrounded by a community that considered him part of the family. The neighborhood women took turns looking after him when Sarah needed to travel to handle cooperative matters. 3 months after the cooperative's creation, Sarah received an unexpected letter. It was from George. "Dear Guardian Sarah, I learned through Dr. Michael that you found our key and formalized our protection system. You have no idea how much happiness this has brought me. Margaret and I are doing well in Phoenix. My brother-in-law helped us start a new life here, but our hearts have always been broken over leaving the families in the region without protection for their assets. If you accept, we would like to return to help with the cooperative. Margaret is good at organization and I still know how to work with metals. We could improve the safe security and help expand the system. Raymond doesn't worry us anymore. Dr. Michael informed us that he is being investigated for several irregularities and will likely have legal troubles soon. If you agree to our return, send a response through Dr. Michael. With eternal gratitude, George and Margaret Harrison." Sarah did not hesitate to respond positively. 2 weeks later, George and Margaret returned to Bakersfield. The reunion was emotional. George cried when he saw that the safe was not only preserved, but better organized than when he had left. Margaret was delighted with Daniel and immediately offered to help care for him. "You did what I couldn't do in 25 years, George said to Sarah. "You turned our informal protection into something official and safe. I just continued the work you started. No, girl, you did much more than that. You had the courage I didn't have to confront Raymond and protect the families." With George and Margaret back, the cooperative expanded even further. They built an additional safe to accommodate new members and implemented a visitation system where families could come check on their assets whenever they wanted. The House with the Hole became the center of a mutual protection network that benefited over 60 families in the region. What began as a desperate situation turned into a story of hope and solidarity. 6 months later, Sarah received an unexpected visit. It was a young man of about 25 who introduced himself as John, the son of George and Margaret. "My parents told me the whole story. I work in Phoenix as an accountant, and I would like to offer my services to the cooperative free of charge." "Why would you do that?" "Because what you've created here is more important than any job I could have in the big city. Community protection is the future for families like ours." John moved to Bakersfield and brought his modern skills to the cooperative. He created a more efficient record-keeping system, helped secure government funding for small rural cooperatives, and even developed partnerships with local banks to offer fair loans to members. What Raymond had tried to exploit for personal gain became a model of solidarity economy that caught the attention of universities and rural development organizations. 2 years after the cooperative's creation, Sarah watched Daniel playing in the backyard with the other children from the community. The boy had learned to walk on the same ground where his grandmother had discovered a hidden treasure. The house with the hole in the center of the living room remained their home, but now the hole was covered with a beautiful wooden structure that served as a table for cooperative meetings. Beneath it, the safe continued protecting the dreams and security of dozens of families. "Sarah," called Margaret, coming from the kitchen with fresh coffee, "a letter arrived from the university in Phoenix. They want to study our system to replicate it in other regions." "Who would have imagined," said George, sitting in the new rocking chair he had built. A system that started informally 40 years ago is now a model for the entire country. Sarah accepted the coffee and looked around. The simple adobe house was full of life and movement. Children played, adults discussed the cooperative's next projects, and elders shared stories and advice. "You know what makes me happiest," she said. "Daniel will grow up knowing that ordinary people can protect each other. He will learn from a young age that solidarity is stronger than greed." That night, after everyone had left, Sarah went down to the underground vault one last time, not to hide or retrieve something, but just to contemplate what they had built together. The shelves were organized and full. Every jar, every box, every envelope represented a family's trust in their community. The system created by George had survived Raymond's threats and transformed into something bigger and stronger. She picked up the ledger and wrote the day's entry. December 1969. The cooperative completes 2 years. 67 participating families, 234 people protected, 0 losses, 0 conflicts. George would say we've surpassed all his dreams. May God continue to bless our work. When she returned to the surface, Daniel was awake in his crib, looking at her with his ever-curious eyes. "Hi, my love," she whispered. "Tomorrow will be another day of work to leave the world a little better for you." Daniel smiled and snuggled up, peaceful in the certainty that he was safe and loved. Sarah looked out the window at the desert landscape. The full moon illuminated the arid land, but she knew that beneath that seemingly poor soil there was more wealth than any individual treasure. There was the wealth of mutual trust, collective protection, and shared hope. The house with the hole had become much more than a place to live. It was a symbol that, even in the most difficult situations, there is always the possibility of turning problems into solutions, fears into courage, and isolation into community. And it had all started when a desperate widow accepted a strange house as payment for a debt she didn't even know existed. 2.5 years after the story began, Sarah woke to the sound of lively voices in the yard. It was the day of the cooperative's monthly meeting, and families were already starting to arrive. Daniel, now almost 3 years old, ran through the house shouting with joy. For him, meeting days were a party because it meant lots of people, lots of food, and lots of games. "Good morning, Guardian," greeted Mrs. Dorothy, arriving with a still steaming pot of hominy pudding. "Good morning, Mrs. Dorothy. How is the family?" "Everyone is well, thank God, and the cooperative. My son got the loan to expand the shoe repair shop. Fair loans had become one of the cooperative's most important activities. With the resources families contributed monthly and the support of partner organizations, they could offer low-interest credit for small businesses and emergencies. "Sarah," called John, approaching with some papers. "I have news about Raymond." "What happened?" "The court confirmed the irregularities. He will have to return 3 properties he took illegally and also pay compensation to the affected families." The news spread quickly among those present, generating a mix of relief and satisfaction. Raymond had been a threat not only to the cooperative, but to many families in the region. "And there's more," John continued. "The state government approved our proposal. We will receive funds to create similar cooperatives in other regions of the desert. That day's meeting was special. In addition to the cooperative's routine business, they discussed expansion plans and how to share their experiences with other communities. "I want to propose something," said Mr. Anthony, raising his hand. "I think we should create an annual award to honor people who stand out in protecting their communities. And I think the first honoree should be our guardian, Sarah." The proposal was approved unanimously, but Sarah refused to be the first honoree. The first prize should go to George. He created the system, protected the families for 25 years, and had the wisdom to leave instructions so everything could continue. Without him, none of this would exist. George, now 70 years old, was moved by the tribute. When he received a wooden plaque with the inscription, "George Harrison, Pioneer Guardian, Protector of Dreams and Hopes," he couldn't hold back his tears. "When I started helping the first family store their documents in 1942, I never imagined it would become what we see today," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You have turned my small dream into a reality that will protect generations." After the assembly, The families gathered for a community meal. It was a tradition for each family to bring something, and the table was plentiful with typical regional dishes: rice and beans, dried beef, peanut crumble, brown sugar loaf, and many other delights. Daniel ran among the people, receiving affection from everyone. He had become a sort of mascot for the cooperative, and each family considered him part of their own. "Aunt Sarah," shouted a girl of about 6 years old, running toward her. It was Lucy, daughter of Mrs. Teresa Johnson. All the children in the cooperative called Sarah Aunt. "Hi, Lucy, what is it?" "Mum said you could tell the story of the house with the hole." "Of course, let's call the other children." Soon a circle formed with 8 children sitting on the floor, looking expectantly at Sarah. She had developed the habit of telling the story of the cooperative to the children, adapting the details for their age. "Once upon a time, there was a lady with a baby who had nowhere to live," she began. "One day a man offered her a strange house. The house had a hole right in the middle of the living room." "How scary!" exclaimed a little boy. She was scared too. But do you know what she discovered when she went to investigate the hole? "What?" they all asked in unison. "She discovered it wasn't an ordinary hole. It was a place where people kept their most precious treasures. And do you know why they kept them there? Why? Because when we keep our treasures together, they are safer than when each person keeps theirs alone." "How so, Aunt?" asked Lucy. "If you have something very important and you keep it only in your house, only you are taking care of it. But if you keep it together with other people, everyone helps take care. It's as if your important thing had many guardians instead of just one." The children became thoughtful, trying to understand the concept. "And did the lady with the baby become a guardian of the treasures?" asked another boy. "Yes, she did. And do you know the most beautiful part of the story?" "What?" "The baby from the story is right here, playing with you. It's Daniel." The children looked at Daniel with renewed admiration, as if he had become a fairy tale character. "And does the hole still exist?" asked Lucy. "Yes, it does. It's inside the house. But now it's a happy hole because it's full of important things that belong to all our families." After the storytelling, the children went off to play, and the adults gathered for the final conversations of the day. "Sarah," said Margaret, approaching, "George and I were talking about the future. We want to propose something." "Go ahead. We know you are young and may want to marry again, have more children. If that happens, we want you to know you can count on us to take care of the cooperative. And more," George added. "We are proposing that the guardian role not be lifelong for just one person. We can create a rotation system where several people take turns with the responsibility." "I hadn't thought of that," admitted Sarah. "But it makes sense. The system becomes stronger if it doesn't depend on just one person." "Exactly. And so if anyone wanted to travel, study, or change their life, the cooperative continued to function normally. The proposal was discussed and approved at the next assembly. They created a system where 3 guardians rotated monthly, and everyone was trained to know every detail of the vault's operation. This change brought a feeling of freedom that Sarah hadn't expected. For the first time since she had taken on the responsibility, she could think about her own dreams without worrying about abandoning the families who depended on her. And it was exactly at this time that she met Paul. Paul Anderson was a teacher who had been sent by the state government to provide adult literacy classes in the region. He stayed at Mr. Anthony Johnson's house, but spent most of his time moving between the cooperative's properties, offering classes to anyone who wanted to learn to read and write. Sarah was one of his first students. "Why do you want to learn to read, Mrs. Sarah?" he asked on the first day of class. "Because I want to fully understand the cooperative's documents. I want to be sure I'm protecting the families in the best way possible." Paul was impressed by her dedication. In just a few weeks, Sarah was reading simple documents and writing small notes. In 2 months, she was helping other people in the classes. "You have a natural talent for teaching," Paul said one day, after watching her explain basic math to Mrs. Dorothy. "I like helping people understand things. Have you ever thought of becoming a teacher officially?" "I never had the opportunity. I've always had to work to survive." "But now you do. The cooperative gives you stability, and you have the intelligence and the will to learn. If you want, I can teach you everything I know." The idea of becoming a teacher fascinated Sarah. She began to study intensively, first with Paul and then with books he brought from the city. Daniel, now 4 years old, got used to seeing his mother studying every night. He himself learned to read and write very early because Sarah practiced the lessons with him. "Mommy, why do you study so much?" he asked one day. "Because knowledge is like the treasures from the hole, my son. The more you have, the more you can share with other people. And when you finish studying, will you teach me?" "I will teach you, other children and adults who didn't have the opportunity when they were little." The relationship between Sarah and Paul evolved naturally from mutual respect to friendship, and from friendship to love. They complemented each other. She had the practical wisdom of life. He had academic knowledge. She knew the community deeply. He brought new ideas from the outside world. When Paul asked Sarah to marry him 2 years after they met, the proposal came with a project. "I want to stay here forever," he said. "I want to marry you, help raise Daniel, and build a community school for the cooperative's families." "A school?" "A school where children learn not just math and English, but also cooperation, community protection, and values of solidarity." "How would you do that?" "By using the cooperative's history as a foundation, the children would grow up understanding that they can trust each other, that they can protect what's important together, and that every person has value in a community." Sarah and Paul's wedding was a community celebration that lasted 3 days. All the families from the cooperative contributed with food, music, and decorations. The ceremony was officiated by a priest who came especially from Fresno, and the celebration took place on the very land of the house with the hole. Daniel, now 5 years old, was the ring bearer. He carried the rings on a little pillow that Mrs. Margaret had embroidered especially for the occasion. "Today isn't just the wedding of Sarah and Paul," said George during the speech. "It's the union of two people dedicated to the good of our community. It's the continuation of our system of mutual protection." The community school began operating 6 months after the wedding. It was built on land the cooperative bought collectively, just 500 meters from the house with the hole. The school was different from any other in the region. Besides traditional subjects, the children learned about cooperation through practical exercises. They kept a small community garden, cared for animals that belonged to everyone, and participated in decisions about how the school was run. Daniel was one of the first students. At 6 years old, he already knew how to read, write, and do basic math. More importantly, he understood he was part of something bigger than himself. "Professor Paul," he asked one day during class, "why do some schools teach children to compete with each other, and ours teaches them to cooperate?" "Because competing means that for someone to win, someone else has to lose. Cooperating means everyone can win together." "Like the hole in my house?" "Exactly like the hole in your house. If each family kept its treasures alone, some might lose them. By keeping them together, everyone stays protected." The school caught the attention of educators from other regions. Groups of teachers came to visit to understand how a school based on cooperative values worked. One of the visitors was an educator from Phoenix University named Professor Helen. "In 20 years studying education, I've never seen children so self-assured and at the same time so concerned with their classmates' well-being," she said after observing the classes for a week. "It's because they grow up seeing that individual success and collective success aren't different things," explained Paul. "For them, it's natural to want everyone to feel included and protected. Would you be willing to host university interns? Our education students could learn a lot here." "Of course, but on one condition," said Sarah. "What?" "The interns will also have to learn about cooperation. They'll participate in community activities, help in the garden, visit the families. We don't want them to see our school just as an object of study. The partnership with the university brought mutual benefits. The interns brought new ideas and material resources while learning about community education. Some fell so in love with the project that they asked to stay permanently. That's how the school grew and became a regional reference in cooperative education. 3 years after the wedding, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The news was received with joy by the whole cooperative, but especially by Daniel. "I'm going to have a brother or a sister," he shouted, running to tell everyone he met. Sarah's pregnancy coincided with the cooperative's 5th anniversary. The celebration was even more special. because it represented not only the community's past and present, but also its future. 5 years ago, we were isolated families trying to protect our assets individually, said Sarah during the anniversary speech, her belly already showing. Today we are a community that protects not only our material assets, but also our values, our education, and our future. And in a few years we'll have the second generation of children who grew up entirely within the cooperative system, added Paul. Children who never knew any other way to live besides cooperation. During the party, Daniel approached Sarah with a question that surprised her. "Mom, when I grow up, can I be a guardian of the whole like you?" "Of course, my son. But why do you want to be?" "Because I want to protect the family's treasures like you protect them. And I want to teach other children about cooperation. Do you understand that being a guardian is a big responsibility?" "I understand. It's like taking care of everyone at the same time." The simplicity and depth of the answer moved Sarah. Daniel, at 8 years old, already intuitively understood the spirit of the system she had helped build. Sarah and Paul's daughter was born on a September morning as the desert awoke from another dry period with the season's first rains. They decided to name her Hope as well, but everyone called her Sally. Sally's birth was celebrated by the entire cooperative. Each family brought a gift for the baby, but the most special gift came from George. "This is the first official item for the second-generation vault," he said, handing over a small wooden box he had made himself. Inside the box was Sally's birth certificate, a family photo, and a letter written by Sarah for her daughter to read when she grew up. "My dear daughter, you were born into a community where people protect each other. This is not normal in the world, but it should be. When you grow up, perhaps the world will be different. Perhaps people will have learned that cooperation is better than competition. If that happens, it will be because people like you continued the work we started here. If the world remains difficult, you will have the knowledge and experience of a community that has proven it's possible to live another way. Whatever the future holds, always remember, you are part of something bigger than yourself. And that is a responsibility, but it is also a strength. With all my love, your mother, Sarah." Sally literally grew up surrounded by the cooperative. As a baby, she was cared for by several women in the community when Sarah needed to travel to represent the cooperative at events or meetings. Daniel became the most protective brother in the world. By age 9, he was already helping change diapers, feed, and play with his sister. "Daniel, you don't need to look after your sister all the time," Sarah said one day. "You can play with your friends." "But I like taking care of her, and she likes it when I tell stories." "What stories do you tell her?" "The story of the whole, the cooperative, Grandpa George. She doesn't understand yet, but I think it's important for her to hear it from a young age." Daniel's dedication to his sister reflected the values he had learned in the community. For him, caring for Sally wasn't an obligation, but a natural extension of the mutual care he saw around him every day. When Sally turned 1, the cooperative already had 90 participating families and had served as a model for creating 5 other similar cooperatives in the California desert. The system had evolved far beyond the original underground vault. It now included rotating loans, a small community bakery, a health post that received monthly visits from doctors from the city, and even a community radio station that broadcast information and music to the entire region. The house with the hole remained the symbolic center of it all. The original hole still existed, but it was now protected by a glass structure that allowed people to see the underground vault without having to go down. It was a way to show visitors the physical origin of the entire system. "Sarah," said Dr. Michael during one of his visits, "I need to tell you something important." "What is it?" "Your cooperative is going to be studied by the United Nations. They are interested in community protection systems that function without external interference." "What does that mean?" "It means what you've created here could inspire communities all over the world. You might be helping to create a new model for rural development." The news left Sarah thoughtful. She had never imagined that the desperate decision to accept a strange house as payment for a debt could have such far-reaching consequences. "Dr. Michael, won't this change our community?" "Not if you don't want it to. External interest can bring resources and recognition, but the essence of the system remains the same. Ordinary people protecting each other." The visit from the United Nations representatives happened 6 months later. It was a team of 5 people from different countries interested in understanding how a rural community had created a sustainable social protection system without depending on government or outside organizations. "How do you ensure the system isn't corrupted by external interests?" asked one of the representatives. "Total transparency and everyone's participation," replied Sarah. "Any important decision is discussed in an assembly, and anyone can examine the records whenever they want." "And how do you ensure the guardians don't abuse their position?" "Because the guardians are chosen by the families themselves and can be replaced at any time, and because the responsibility is shared, not concentrated in one person alone." "What was the biggest challenge you faced?" "The biggest challenge wasn't technical," answered George, who was participating in the meeting despite his 75 years. "It was overcoming fear and distrust. People who have always been exploited take a long time to believe they can trust each other." "And how did you overcome that?" "By starting small and being transparent at every step. When people see that the system really works, that it truly protects what is theirs, trust grows naturally." The UN representatives stayed a whole week in the community, observing the daily workings of the cooperative. They attended assemblies, visited the vault, talked with children from the school, and participated in community activities. "In 15 years of visiting community development projects around the world, I've never seen something so organic and sustainable," said the team coordinator on the last day. "You've proven it's possible to create prosperity without exploitation." "What will be the outcome of your visit?" asked Paul. "We will recommend that the UN use your model as a basis for rural development programs in other countries, but always respecting the specific characteristics of each culture." After the UN team left, the community gathered to discuss what had happened. "Everyone," said Sarah, "I want to make it clear that, regardless of what happens out there, our priority remains our own community. We won't change our way of working to please anyone from the outside." "I totally agree," said Mr. Anthony, "but I also think it's our duty to share what we've learned with other people in need." "How do we do that without losing our identity?" "By receiving visitors, offering courses, sending our young people to teach in other communities," suggested Paul. "But always making it clear that there's no ready-made recipe. Each community needs to adapt the ideas to its own reality." The conversation resulted in the creation of the Rural Cooperatives Training Center, which would operate alongside the community school. Young people from other regions could come study the cooperative model for a few months, but always participating in community life, not just observing from the outside. Daniel, now 12 years old, volunteered to be one of the training center's monitors. "I want to teach people my age how cool it is to live in a cooperative community," he said. "Are you sure it's a big responsibility?" said Sarah. "I'm sure, and Sally can help me when she grows up a little more." Sally, now 2.5 years old, was already showing signs of having inherited the family's sociable personality. She loved meeting new people and always greeted visitors with spontaneous hugs. The training center began operating the following year, receiving groups of 10 young people every 3 months. They came from different states in the Southwest, and some even from other countries in Latin America. "What impresses me most about the visitors," Margaret commented one day, "is how they arrive suspicious and leave moved. It's as if they discover a better world is possible." "It's because most people grow up thinking competition and distrust are natural," explained Sarah. "When they see it's possible to live another way, they feel hope." The name Sarah had become prophetic in a way she could never have imagined as a child. At 40, Sarah looked back and could hardly believe the journey she had traveled. From a desperate widow with a baby in her arms, she had become a respected community leader, teacher, mother of a loving family, and guardian of a system that benefited hundreds of families. "Have you ever thought about writing a book about our story?" asked Paul one day, as they watched Daniel and Sally play in the backyard. "I don't know if I could write a book." "Of course you could. You teach history better than any writer I know. Maybe one day. But for now, I prefer living the history rather than writing about it." At that moment, Sally ran toward them, tripped, and fell. Instead of crying, she got up, looked at her scraped knees and said, "It doesn't hurt much. She'll be okay." The girls' reaction perfectly summarized the community's spirit. When something went wrong, they got up, assessed the situation, and moved forward, knowing they had support to recover. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. 5 years later, when Sally was 7 and Daniel was 17, the cooperative faced its biggest test since the threat from Raymond. A multinational company arrived in the region offering to buy large tracts of land to plant eucalyptus for paper production. The amounts offered were tempting for families who had always struggled against poverty. "The problem isn't the money," explained Dr. Michael during an extraordinary assembly. "The problem is that if many families sell their land, our community will cease to exist." "And there's another problem," added John, who had become the cooperative's official accountant. "The company doesn't just want the land, they also want rights to the region's underground water reserves." "Does that include the aquifer that feeds our vault?" asked Sarah. "Yes, it does. If they control the water, they could completely undermine our system." The news sparked heated debate. Some families were tempted by the company's offers, especially those facing financial difficulties. Others categorically refused to sell. "Everyone," said Sarah, asking for the floor. "I completely understand those thinking about selling. Money is tight and we all have needs. But I want us to think about one thing. What is more valuable, the money the company offers or the protection system we have here?" "Easy for you to say," retorted one of those present. "You have your own house and a guaranteed job. I have children to feed and debts to pay." "You're right," admitted Sarah. "I can't speak for anyone else's problems but my own. But I can propose a solution." "What?" "That the cooperative use its resources to help the families in difficulty instead of letting them face problems alone." The proposal generated more discussion. The cooperative had accumulated considerable financial reserves over the years, but using them to help individual members would be a significant change in their way of operating. "If we do this," said Mrs. Dorothy, "how do we ensure the resources don't run out?" "By creating a rotating system," suggested Paul. "The families who receive help today contribute to help other families tomorrow. It's the same principle as the community fund, but applied to financial emergencies." "And what if someone receives help and then still decides to sell their land?" "That's their choice," replied Sarah. "We can't force anyone to stay, but we can ensure that those who stay have the means to remain." The proposal was approved by a majority. The cooperative created an emergency fund that could lend money interest-free to families in difficulty, with repayment to be made when their situation improved. Of the 63 families who received offers from the company, only 7 decided to sell. The others remained in the region, many of them using the support from the emergency fund to overcome their temporary hardships. "A partial victory," said George during the assembly that evaluated the results. "We lost some dear families, but we kept the essence of our community." "And we learned an important lesson," added Sarah. "A mutual protection system has to include financial protection too, not just protection of stored assets." The experience with the multinational company strengthened the cooperative even further. The emergency fund became a permanent tool, and several other cooperatives in the region asked for guidance to create similar systems. Daniel, now 18, had become a respected young leader in the community. He divided his time between his studies. He was taking a correspondence technical course in administration, his work at the training center, and active participation in the cooperative's decisions. "Mom," he said one day, "I want to make a proposal for the next assembly." "What is it?" "I think we should create an exchange program with the other cooperatives in the region. Young people could spend a few months in different communities, learning other forms of organization." "Why do you think that's important?" "Because our community is great, but we risk becoming too closed off. If our young people get to know other experiences, they can bring new ideas back here." "And would you like to participate in this exchange?" "I would. But only if the community agrees and only if Sally is old enough not to miss me too much." Daniel's concern for his younger sister was touching. Sally, now 7, was a cheerful and intelligent child who adored her brother. "Daniel, if you go traveling, can I come along?" she asked when she learned of the proposal. "Not this time, Shorty, but when you grow up, we can travel together. Promise?" "I promise." The exchange program was approved and implemented. Daniel was one of the first participants, spending 3 months at an agricultural cooperative in rural New Mexico. When he returned, he was full of ideas about sustainable agriculture and solar energy. "What impressed me the most," he told the assembly, "was seeing how each cooperative finds its own solutions to similar problems. There's no right or wrong way, there's the way that works for each reality." The ideas Daniel brought back resulted in the creation of a small community garden with smart irrigation systems and the installation of solar panels at the school and the training center. Sally, inspired by her brother's example, began to show a growing interest in the cooperative's activities. By 8 years old, she was already attending assemblies as an observer and asking smart questions about how the system worked. "Daddy," she asked Paul one day, "why are some outsiders surprised when they see our cooperative?" "Because in most places, people don't cooperate as much as we do here." "Why not?" "Because they haven't learned it's possible, or because they're afraid to trust." "Could we teach them?" "That's exactly what we do when we host visitors at the training center." "When I grow up, can I help teach too?" "Of course, if that's what you want to do." Sally's natural curiosity about cooperation and her talent for explaining complex ideas simply suggested she had inherited the family's leadership skills. When Sarah turned 45, the cooperative organized a tribute party. It wasn't just a personal birthday, but a celebration of 15 years of the cooperative system. 15 years ago, Sarah said during her speech, "I was a desperate woman who accepted a strange house because I had no choice. Today I am a fulfilled woman living in a community where everyone has choices." "And the whole?" someone shouted from the audience, provoking general laughter. "The whole is still there, protecting our treasures. But now we know the most important treasure isn't kept underground. It's here, in the relationships we've built with each other." The party lasted 3 days and was attended by representatives from all partner cooperatives, plus government officials and even some former trainees from the training center who came from other states. During the party, George, now 80 years old, announced his official retirement as advisory guardian. "The time has come to pass the baton completely to the new generation," he said. "Sarah, Daniel, Sally, Paul, John, and all the young people in the cooperative know more about cooperation than I ever did." "But you will always be the founder of our system," said Sarah, moved. "And you will always be the people who turned my simple idea into something that changed the lives of hundreds of families." George's retirement symbolically marked a new phase for the cooperative. The first generation of founders was passing leadership to people who had grown up within the cooperative system. Daniel, now 20, was unanimously elected as the youngest official guardian in the cooperative's history. Sally, at 10 years old, was appointed guardian in training, a position created especially for her. "I have a confession to make," Sarah said during Daniel's election. "When he was born, I was just worried about surviving one day at a time. I never imagined I was raising a future community leader." "That's what happens when we raise children in a cooperative community," Margaret replied. "They grow up naturally thinking of the common good." Daniel's first project as guardian was to create a living memory of the cooperative. He organized recording sessions where the founders told their stories to be preserved for future generations. "Why do you think it's important to record these stories?" asked Sally, who helped by operating the recorder. "Because stories are more powerful than rules," Daniel explained. "When people hear how our cooperative started, they understand why it works. And when I have children, will I tell these stories to them?" "Yes, you will. And they will tell their children." That's how values are passed from generation to generation. The recordings became a precious archive. There was George's story about the first deposits in the vault, Sarah's story about finding the key, stories of families saved from desperate situations by the cooperative system, and many others. The archive was organized in a small library built especially for it. Visitors could listen to the recordings and understand the evolution of the system over 2 decades. When Sally turned 12, she made a proposal that surprised everyone at the assembly. I want to organize a meeting of children and teenagers from all the cooperatives in the region, so we can exchange ideas on how to improve our systems. Do you think children can contribute to improving cooperatives? Asked one of the adults present. I think so. We grew up inside the systems, so we see things you might not see, and we have ideas you might not have. The proposal was approved, and the first Desert Young Cooperators meeting took place 6 months later. 43 young people between the ages of 8 and 18 came, representing 8 different cooperatives. For 3 days they discussed problems and solutions, presented innovative projects, and created a communication network among young cooperators. What impressed me the most, commented Paul, was the natural way they approach complex issues. For them, cooperation isn't an academic theory, it's the normal way to live. One of the proposals that came out of the meeting was to create a cooperative currency that could be used for exchanges between the different cooperatives in the region. The idea was that a family from an agricultural cooperative could trade products for services from an artisan's cooperative without needing to use money. It's brilliant, said John when he heard the proposal. This would create a local economy independent of the traditional financial system. The cooperative currency project took 2 years to develop and implement, but became a success. Families could earn cooperative credits by contributing to their communities and use those credits to obtain products or services from other cooperatives. Sally was one of the designers of the system and became the youngest cooperative ambassador in the region, traveling to explain how the currency worked to other interested communities. My daughter is really becoming a leader, Sarah said to Paul, with pride and a hint of concern. Why do you seem worried? Because leadership brings responsibility. I want her to have time to be a child too. She is a child, just a child who grew up learning she can make a difference in the world. Sarah's concern was understandable, but unfounded. Sally continued to be a normal girl who liked to play, study, and spend time with friends. The difference was that her games often involved organizing cooperatives among her dolls or solving community problems in her play. When Sally turned 15, the original cooperative had expanded to include 12 rural communities and directly benefited over 300 families. The training center had trained young people from 16 Brazilian states and 5 Latin American countries. The house with the hole continued to be the symbolic heart of it all, but was now part of a complex that included the school, the library, the training center, administrative offices, and residences for long-term visitors. Sometimes I have trouble believing what we've built, Sarah said to George during one of his visits. The old guardian, now 85, remained sharp and engaged, though physically frailer. I have no trouble at all, he replied. I always knew you had the heart and intelligence needed for this. What surprises me is the speed at which everything grew. Do you think we grew too fast? No. I think the world was lacking examples like ours. That's why people embraced the idea so quickly. At that time, the cooperative received regular visits from university researchers, journalists, politicians, and representatives of international organizations. But the community's policy remained the same from the start. All visitors were welcome, provided they participated in community life instead of just observing from the outside. Congressman, said Sarah to a politician who came proposing to turn the cooperative into a government pilot project, we don't want to be anyone's project. We want to continue being an example of what's possible when ordinary people organize themselves. But with government support, you could expand much more quickly and lose our autonomy in the process. Thank you, but we prefer to grow at our own pace. The refusal of government support wasn't due to political distrust, but to accumulated wisdom. The cooperative had prospered precisely because it was independent of external interests. Mother, said Daniel, now 25, and married to a young teacher named Carol, I understand why you refused the government's support, but sometimes I wonder if we're not being selfish. How so? We have a system that works, that could benefit millions of people. Shouldn't we accept help to expand more quickly? Son, there's a difference between expanding and being co-opted. If we accept government support, we'll have to follow rules imposed from the outside. And then we stop being a free cooperative and become a controlled project. But what about the people who could benefit? They benefit when they visit our training center and return to their regions with the knowledge to create their own systems. That's real expansion, not the imposition of a model. The conversation reflected a natural tension that every successful organization faces: how to grow while maintaining the original values. The issue was resolved creatively when Sally, now 17, proposed creating the Southwest Free Cooperatives Network. Instead of one giant cooperative controlled from the top down, she explained, we can have many small cooperatives connected horizontally. Each maintains its autonomy, but all share knowledge and resources. The proposal was revolutionary. Instead of expanding geographically, the original cooperative would become the nucleus of a network of independent but connected organizations. The project took 3 years to implement, but resulted in the creation of 47 autonomous cooperatives spread across 6 states. Each adapted the basic principles to its own cultural and economic reality. It's like a big family, explained Sally to a group of international visitors. Each cooperative is like a sibling. We're different from each other, but we share the same fundamental values. The family analogy was perfect. The cooperatives helped each other in times of difficulty, shared discoveries and innovations, and celebrated individual successes together. When Sarah turned 50, the birthday party automatically became a celebration of the entire network. Representatives from all 47 cooperatives came to Bakersfield, turning the small town into a mini international conference on cooperativism. 50 years of a woman who changed the Southwest, said the mayor of Bakersfield during the city's official tribute. I didn't change it alone, replied Sarah. I was part of a community that discovered how to change itself. During the party, Daniel announced that he and Carol were expecting their first child. It will be the 3rd generation of our family to grow up within the cooperative system, he said, emotional. And what will you name the baby? Asked Sally. If it's a boy, it will be George, in honor of the founder. If it's a girl, it will be Sarah, continuing the family tradition. The news of Carol's pregnancy was received with joy by the entire community. For many people, that baby would represent confirmation that the cooperative system was sustainable in the long term. You know what makes me happiest? Sarah said to Paul that evening. It's not just that we're going to have a grandson, it's that he'll grow up in a world where cooperation is normal. And if our cooperative keeps growing, maybe he'll live to see cooperation become normal all over the world. That would be beautiful, but even if that doesn't happen, he'll know it's possible. Sarah's grandson was born on a rainy day that ended a long drought. It was interpreted as a good sign by the community. It was a boy, and he was named George, as promised. Old George, now 88 years old, was emotional when he held the baby for the first time. This boy will see things I can't even imagine, he said. Maybe he'll live to see the whole world organized into cooperatives. Do you really think that's possible? Asked Carol. 50 years ago, I thought a cooperative like ours was impossible. Today, we see 47 cooperatives functioning. If we've come so far in 50 years, imagine what can happen in the next 50. George's answer summed up the realistic optimism that characterized the community. They had learned that profound changes are possible, but they take time and dedication to happen. Little George grew up surrounded by the same environment of cooperation that had formed his father and his aunt. By the age of 2, he was already attending community meetings as an observer and showed a natural interest in collective activities. Looks like we're going to have another cooperative leader in the family, Paul commented, watching his grandson organize his toys into little cooperatives where each doll had a specific function. Or maybe he'll choose to be something else, Sarah replied. What's important is that he grows up knowing he has choices. When little George turned 3, old George passed away peacefully in his sleep. The entire region mobilized for the funeral, which turned into a celebration of the life of a man who had dedicated 70 years of his existence to the well-being of his community. He lived to see the cooperative's 3rd generation, Sarah said during the eulogy. He lived to see his name perpetuated in a child who will grow up knowing the values he planted. Few men are fortunate enough to see their work flourish so much during their own lifetime. George's passing marked the end of an era, but also the beginning of another. The cooperative was solid enough to honor his memory by continuing to grow and evolve. Sally, now 20 years old and a graduate in Solidarity Economics from a university that had created the course specifically to study cooperative models, officially assumed the general coordination of the cooperative network. "I have a proposal," she said during her first assembly as coordinator. "I want us to create the George Harrison Fund, aimed at supporting new cooperatives in regions where they don't yet exist." "How would it work?" asked Daniel. "Each cooperative in the network would contribute a percentage of its revenue monthly. The fund would be used to send consultants, offer training courses, and provide initial support for communities interested in creating their own cooperative systems." The proposal was approved unanimously. The George Harrison Fund became the mechanism through which the network expanded its influence without losing its autonomy. 5 years later, the fund had supported the creation of 72 new cooperatives in 9 Brazilian states and 3 neighboring countries. The model of horizontal cooperativism was spreading across the continent. "Mom," said Sally during an evaluation visit to a cooperative in rural Canada, "I think I finally understand the scale of what started with your decision to accept a strange house." "How so?" "That decision didn't just change your life. It changed how thousands of families relate to the idea of protection and solidarity. You literally planted a seed of social transformation." "I didn't plant it alone. George planted it. I watered it. You and Daniel fertilized it. And now thousands of people are harvesting the fruits." The conversation happened as they watched a new Canadian cooperative hold its first assembly. The discussions were in Spanish, but the principles and dynamics were exactly the same as they knew in Bakersfield. "It's moving to see that cooperation is a universal language," said Sally. "Cooperation has always been universal. What we did was remind people that it's possible." When they returned to the US, Sally brought an ambitious proposal to create a cooperative university that would offer formal training in solidarity, economics, cooperative management, and community development. "We have over 20 years of accumulated knowledge," she argued. "We have a network of 47 cooperatives that can serve as practical campuses, and we have demand from young people all over the world who want to learn about cooperativism." The university project took 2 years to be approved by the network's cooperatives and 2 more to be implemented. When it finally opened, the Desert Cooperative University welcomed students from 17 countries. "Grandma," said little George, now 7 years old, to Sarah, "did our house turn into a giant school?" "No, my love. Our house is still our house, but now it's part of a giant school that spreads across several countries." "And can I study at that school when I grow up?" "You can, but first you need to learn well about cooperation here in our community." "I already know about cooperation. It's when everyone helps each other." "That's right, and do you help everyone?" "I do. I took care of your garden when you traveled. I helped Dad Daniel organize the library books, and I taught the new kids how the hole in our house works." The simplicity with which the boy described his cooperative activities showed how these values had become natural for the children growing up in the system. At 55, Sarah decided to partially retire from leadership activities to dedicate herself to what she loved most, telling stories. "I want to spend my last active years recording all the stories of our cooperative," she announced. "Stories of the people who participated, the difficulties they overcame, the joys they experienced." "Are you going to write a book?" asked Paul. "I'm going to write several books, one about the history of our cooperative, another about the techniques we developed, and a third that is a practical manual for those who want to create new cooperatives." The book project occupied Sarah for 3 years. She interviewed hundreds of people, revisited old documents, and organized all the historical material that had been accumulated over 2 decades. When the 3 books were published simultaneously, they became an international reference in cooperativism. Universities worldwide began using them as required reading in solidarity economics courses. "Mum has become a famous writer," joked Daniel during the book launch. "I'm not a famous writer. I'm a storyteller who was lucky enough to live an interesting story." The success of the books brought invitations for lectures at universities and international conferences. Sarah accepted some, but always on the condition that part of the fees would be directed to the George Harrison Fund. During a lecture at Harvard University in Boston, a student asked what had been the most important moment of her entire journey. The most important moment wasn't when I discovered the safe, nor when we created the official cooperative, nor when the network expanded, she replied. It was when I realized my grandson plays cooperatively naturally without having to learn theories about it. That is the moment that confirms we managed to create a new generation. The answer moved the audience and was cited in several academic articles on cooperative education. Little George, now 10 years old, already showed natural leadership similar to his family's. He organized activities for younger children, mediated conflicts between schoolmates, and had creative ideas to improve community life. "Grandma," he said one day, "I have an idea for our cooperative." "What is it?" "We could create a cooperative just for children so we can learn to make important decisions by ourselves." "How would it work?" "We would have our own assemblies, our own projects, our own budget. But we would still participate in the adults' assemblies too." The idea was brilliant. Instead of being just observers or apprentices, the children would have their own space to practice democracy and cooperation. The Bakersfield Children's Cooperative was created 6 months later, with 23 children between 6 and 12 years old. They decided their first project would be to create a cooperative playground where all children in the region could play for free. "How will you get money to build the playground?" asked Sally, who was invited to be a consultant for the children's cooperative. "We will organize theater performances about cooperation and sell tickets," explained little George, who had been elected first president of the children's cooperative. "And if you don't get enough money? Then we ask for a loan from the adults' cooperative and pay it back by working at the training center during the holidays." The maturity and organization of the children impressed even the most experienced adults in the cooperative. In 8 months, they secured resources and volunteer labor to build the playground. The inauguration of the George Harrison Cooperative Playground was a community celebration that attracted families from the entire region. It was the first public playground in Bakersfield, and it had been conceived, funded, and coordinated by children. "I am proud of you," said Sarah during the inauguration ceremony. "You proved that age is no obstacle to making a difference in the community." "Thank you, Grandma, but it was you who taught us that we can do anything if we work together." Little George's phrase perfectly summarized the legacy Sarah had built. More than creating a cooperative or a network of cooperatives, she had created a culture where people of all ages believed in their ability to transform their reality through cooperation. At 60 years old, Sarah looked around during an assembly and could barely recognize the desperate woman who had accepted a strange house 30 years before. The room was full of people from several generations, from Margaret, who at 82 remained active, to babies in their mother's arms. There were representatives from all the cooperatives in the network, students from the cooperative university, visitors from other countries, and children from the children's cooperative. All were united by the same spirit that had motivated George to create the first underground safe, the conviction that ordinary people can protect each other if they work together. "I have an announcement to make," said Sarah, asking for the floor. "After 30 years as guardian, I have decided to retire completely." A murmur of surprise went through the assembly. "But this does not mean I will abandon the cooperative," she continued. "It means the time has come to fully trust the new generation. Sally, Daniel, little George, and all the children in the children's cooperative know more about cooperation than I ever did." "Who will replace you?" someone in the audience asked. "No one will replace me. The role of a single guardian no longer exists. We now have a rotating system where several people share the responsibility." "And what will you do in retirement?" "I'll do what I've always wanted to do since discovering the whole. I'll take care of my family, my garden, and tell stories to anyone who wants to listen." The assembly approved Sarah's retirement with a round of applause that lasted 5 minutes. End of story. Now tell us, what did you think of this story of overcoming and solidarity? Do you believe communities like Sarah's can really exist in real life? Leave your opinion in the comments, share your own cooperation experiences, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Your participation is very important to us.